Hello and welcome to The Olive Tree with me, Julia Fisher. Howard Bass and his wife Randi moved from the United States to live in Israel almost 40 years ago, and they've been living in Beersheba ever since. Why, I asked him via Zoom, did they decide to leave the good life in America and move to Israel?
The story belongs to the Lord. we did not, intend to come to Israel. That was never a thought to us as we were meeting and getting to know each other. When we got married, I was an unbelieving Jew, and she was a non-born again Christian. And when we both got saved during a bicycle trip that we took after our wedding around the U.S., more or less, we got saved during that trip, and the Lord said, go to Israel. Now, I had come twice as an unbeliever, but it was not home. Important, but not home. So Jesus made it home. So we came 7 months later. We got saved 10 months after we had gotten married. We got to Israel 7 months after that. A total upheaval, really, in anything that we had thought before. And we didn't know anybody here. We didn't have anybody behind us there. And we wound up in Netanya through a Jewish Voice connection that we had met the Jewish Voice in Phoenix, Arizona, the founders, and they had an apartment in Netanya that we could rent. They gave us the name of David and Lisa Loden, and that's how we got started. And once Randi understood about a month after we arrived that it's God's will that we should live here, because I didn't tell her we were coming here to live. I asked the Lord, you need to tell her. And it's the best prayer. It's the best prayer I've ever had.
Wow.
And so after a month of being here, she understood it was God's will that we should stay here, and you don't want to disobey God. So after we knew we are going to be living here, then we asked the Lord, where do you want us to live? You just said, go to Israel. Okay, we've been in Netanya for these months. We're getting to know the people a little bit, but we're not taking it for granted. That's where you want us to live. So where do you want us to live? And we had a few conditions, so to speak. We wanted it to be Middle Eastern, where you needed Hebrew, even though it was bad Hebrew like mine, where it was not a tourist city. It was not a large city like Tel Aviv, not a religious city like Jerusalem, not a hilly city like Haifa, things like that. Middle Eastern. Anyway, he led us to Beersheba for a visit. We met some people here, and we had met people in other places. We were going around the country. Randi had never been to Israel. We would ask David and Lisa, okay, we're going to this part of the country today. Do you know any believers there? And that's how we began to meet people and see the country. And then when it came to Beersheba, it was no different than being anywhere else in that sense. But somehow the Lord got us both to be thinking, this is where, I want you. So then we gave him, a fleece, about Netanya to make sure, because we were just, again, getting to know the people, we liked them, to make sure it's not Netanya. And Netanya was closed for us and what we were looking for. We were new immigrants now, and just a married couple. And they said, there's nothing for you, Netanya. This is the Jewish agency. And we asked about Beersheba. They said, oh, yes, plenty for you there. So we took that as the confirmation that Beersheba was what God was showing us. So we went down to Beersheba about 4 to 4.5 months after we had arrived in Israel. And we joined in with the local believers who were already here. And that's where we still are.
But, Howard, 40 years ago, surely there weren't that many believers in the land. I mean, and Beersheba's in the middle of the desert. So what were they doing there?
Well, a lot of the people, the believers in Beersheba, were from Eastern Europe, Romania, especially Romania. And then you had a few others who were, there was from Finland, and he was one of the founding elders of the congregation, another from the United States, one of the founding elders of the congregation. And they were just a small group meeting at the Bible House in Beersheba, right there in the middle of the old city. A real testimony for the Lord right there. And that's where they were meeting, and we just joined in with them. And in the whole country, there were still very few believers relatively, and everybody more or less knew everybody. We even had a national Passover Seder every year at the Baptist village. And that continued until the wave of immigration came from the former Soviet Union. And then we had one more national Passover service, and we all realized this is the last one. It's too many now. And at the same time, we also realized we do not know everybody anymore. And the work in Beersheba was always sort of out of sight, out of mind to people. They were amazed that we would want to live in Beersheba. Lots of people were amazed, and lots of them are still amazed we're still here. We had the people in Beersheba, the believers in Beersheba, were doubtful whether we would remain. They assumed we're just going to come and go at some point, like most people did and do. But the Lord led us to choose to live there. He made it home. And that's the way we always look at it. This is home. We're not going anywhere. And
now, what was the attitude? What was it like living in Israel as a believer in those days when there were so few of you? How were you viewed?
Well, we were viewed then with much suspicion, and some believers were afraid to be seen going into the Bible house, for example. Some were afraid to not to have the windows open when we would sing. And some of these were mature believers, and it was like, I hope we're not going to always be like this.
And who were they and what were they afraid of?
Of persecution. Some of them had already had the experience that we also had a taste of very early on, of not being allowed to become citizens because they were believers in Jesus. And so they knew there was opposition already. They also knew that people's jobs could be affected, and they did not want to lose their jobs if they had them. I also didn't get a job offer, partly because he knew I was a believer. It's just ingrained in the Jewish people, that we do not believe in Jesus. In fact, he's bad. It's not just a matter of an option. So there was this fear of coming to a country that it's just part of our upbringing. Jesus, we don't want you if you believe in Jesus and you think Jewish people should also believe in him and get baptized. So we came into that as well. I had to prove I was Jewish to the Jewish agency, and they sent me to the rabbinic court, and they wanted me to prove it. And then I went back to the Jewish agency, and they had all kinds of reasons why they believed me, but they wanted an Orthodox rabbi to say that my mother was Jewish according to their understanding, either born Jewish or through an Orthodox conversion. She was born Jewish. Her maiden name was Levine, but they said we don't know the rabbi who married them, my father and mother, who got married in 1943 before the law of return. Mm-hmm. So the people were acting on the basis of what they would like the country to be, meaning we don't want people who believe in Jesus here, certainly not Jewish. And they were acting against the law. And we came into that. That's been the prevailing attitude for most of the years until more recently. There's more openness that, there are believers in Jesus, Jewish believers, but for the most part, it's still something not kosher. It's not acceptable. And for some people, they're getting opposition. There are congregations still, like in Ashdod right now, that are not allowed to meet in a new facility that they have built. We've had, persecution against our congregation a couple of big times. Arad has had that in the past, especially, but even until today, they still cannot meet in Arad. Not to mention the Ortizes. There's something that's going on. It's there, and it will surface again, even bigger at some point.
Is it just verbal persecution, Howard? How do you experience persecution? What does it look like?
Well, it's varying kinds of persecution. I mean, at the basic level, persecution, according to Jesus, is just he's bringing a sword into your household, and mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and children against parents. It's a family. We don't believe in Jesus, and we don't like it that you do, type thing. That's the fundamental level of it. And it gets, it can get dangerous when you read what he says in that context. So the verbal is there, or just the bad attitude towards you, that you would believe in Jesus. How can you? You're worse than the Nazis. They killed our body. You're killing our souls. Go to Gaza. Live there with the Muslims, with the Arabs. things like that. And then there has been the physical persecution, whether it be, angry protest demonstrations that become more aggressive and more, pushing and shoving and whatever, whether it be a bomb, planted in a Purim package at a family's, door, whether it be throwing rocks or spitting or cursing or calling you out in the streets, you're a missionary, or putting up posters and things like that. Some of these things still go on, and sometimes in some places they've waned because they'll just move on to somebody else. But the feeling is there, and even if people become moderate in their thinking, you'll always have the ultra orthodox who will not compromise. So you're dealing with a spirit, like the Judaism will never accept that Jesus is the Messiah. Islam will never accept Israel, or that Jesus is the Son of God and died on the cross and rose from the dead. You might find Jews who will accept that you can believe in Jesus as the Messiah, who are unbelieving Jews. You may have Muslims who will accept, okay, Israel's okay, we're fine with Israel, but we're not going to change the system. We're not going to change. You can't destroy a spirit.
You've been listening to Howard Bass, a Jewish pastor in BeerSheva, and we'll hear more from him next week. The Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund is a Christian charity based in the UK that supports the needs of both Jewish believers and Arab or Palestinian Christians living in Israel and the wider Middle East. If you'd like to know more about our work and receive our free bi-monthly newsletter, please visit our website, olivetreefund.org. Meanwhile, join me at the same time next week for another story from the Olive Tree. Until then, goodbye.